The taco trade, they're saying Trump always chickens out on your tariff threats, and that's why markets are higher this week. What's your response to that?
I kick out?
Chicken out.
Oh, isn't that nice? Chicken out. I've never heard that. You mean because I reduced China from 145% that I set down to 100 and then down to another number? And I said you have to open up your whole country. And because I gave the European Union a 50% tax, but I knew that. But don't ever say what you said. That's a nasty question.
Nasty question. And Ryan, just on the basis of that and people being like, oh shit, now he's going to put like 600% tariffs on China or whatever, the market started to plummet. We can put A2 up on the screen. The futures fell immediately after this, just sort of like psychologizing this president, and then he wouldn't want to look weak and like a chicken, and he'd have to do something outrageous to prove all the haters and doubters wrong. So that's where we were before the court decision came down.
Yeah, I'm all for transparency. I want journalists to press our leaders on the issues of the day, but couldn't we have let this one go?
Do we really need to dare him to destroy the world economy? Do we really need to do that?
Imagine somebody coming in and saying, Israel says you're too much of a chicken to nuke Iran.
Oh my God.
So they say you won't do it. He's like, who said that? Like Marty McFly over here, World War III. So that you just can't handle being called a chicken. So yes, basically the courts had to step in.
Yeah, right. Hours later, we get this decision of like, hold the phone.
The whole world was so panicked. They're like, what can we do about this? And so we can put up A3, the International Court of Trade, which I hadn't even been following this case, but a company sued saying, look, the authority under which Trump is laying down all of these tariffs is way outside what Congress has delegated to the president. And I feel guilty here for not kind of going back and reading some of these tariff laws. Although oftentimes I go back and read laws and I'm like, what they're doing now does not comply with this law. And it's like, okay, so what?
Right.
Thanks, Spencer. Like, who cares?
Right.
Like, it's about power.
Right.
So you can identify this and it still doesn't matter. This company identified it and took it to a judge who looked at it and was like, yeah, this is true. So we all understand that the president has the unilateral authority to move tariffs because Congress has delegated that power to him. But Congress did it in a very specific way for a national emergency, for when particular industries are, need help, and you can't have Congress coming in and, moving tariffs by 5% on, the aluminum industry every time on every country. But they never delegated the power to move tariffs on every country all at once.
Right.
And the judge is like, no, yeah, you can't do this.
Yeah. Yeah, this was one, I really looked into it at the beginning, like right after Liberation Day. And I always felt that there was a good chance it would get struck down by the courts because whereas obviously, the Trump-appointed judges and the Supreme Court, which is profoundly conservative on a lot of social and cultural issues, they're going to be sympathetic to him. But these are, many of them, Chamber of Commerce type conservatives in the court system. And, when you think about the basics of our Constitution, the power of the purse obviously rests with Congress. And so the idea that any president could just, with an executive order or with a tweet or whatever, completely upend our economic system, the global economic system, that always seemed, let's just say, far-fetched.
Yeah.
And I read some legal analyses at the time that seemed to think that there was a good chance that it would be struck down. But like you, I hadn't been following the specifics of where the cases were and how they were working their way through. Now, he does have significant power still to levy tariffs. And some of the analysis I was reading yesterday is he's likely to shift to using the Section 232 tariffs, so like the sectoral tariffs, where you can say effectively like, oh, this particular industry is really important for national defense. So like the steel tariffs, right, are probably on really solid ground with regard to the Section 232 powers. This is a national defense, there's a national security threat involved here. We're going to put these sectoral tariffs on this one particular industry. But in terms of saying, hey, entire globe, including islands with just penguins on it, this is what we're doing, that piece seems to be struck down. Now, the other question with the Trump administration, as always, is, are they going to listen, right? I'm curious your thoughts on this, and I saw you tweeting about this. I suspect because Trump has already backed off of the most maximalist version of his trade war, I suspect they may actually comply broadly with this ruling that comes against them, and I'm sure they're going to appeal as well, and so there's going to be a process that plays out, et cetera. But I do think that this may be the beginning of the end of the more maximalist direction for his trade war. And in addition, even before the appeal goes through and all those things happen, like if you're the EU or you're Japan or you're any other country and you're negotiating on these trade deals, suddenly you have a lot more leverage because you know that the courts are already saying this isn't constitutional. So you are much less likely to bend to whatever it is his desires are, giving them Starlink and 0% tariffs or whatever and a, development deal for his sons or whatever the, contours of that are. You are much likely to bend on those provisions than you were before because you feel like, okay, ultimately the courts are probably going to say, you can't do this anyway.
Yeah, and if you're one of the kind of anti-tariff people in the White House, you're going to use this moment to say, look, let's ease off a little bit. Like we're not allowed to do this. Take the win. Now you're not chickening out.
Right.
Like you were totally willing to do this, but now you can say, hey, I would have done it, because tariffs worked for him as a political messaging device to show that he cares about the American worker.
You mean like in the campaign?
During the campaign.
Yes.
So it was a stand-in for, I'm going to fight for you. They don't work so well when he lays them out so incompetently and insanely. And then the American workers are going to suffer. There's all layoffs already because of them. So this would allow him to have the rhetorical win. I fought for you.
Yes.
And I want to fight for you, and I'm going to continue fighting for you. But I'm also not going to, but you're then not going to materially destroy your workers' lives by haphazardly and recklessly going forward with these. So yeah, maybe they just look at this and take the win.
Well, and it's interesting too, because if you put up A4, Weigel was pointing out that Trump's approval rating has already recovered from the fallout of Liberation Day. I don't think there's any doubt, if you look critically at the polling, that the tariff regime was the most unpopular thing that he's done. It is the thing that has triggered the most movement away from him. And but as he has sort of walked back from the original Liberation Day, the insane chart, and rolled back, a significant chunk of the China tariffs. And I never want to overstate this because 30% on China was still like a really significant tariff and a really major reordering. 10% tariffs across the board is still really major reordering. But as he backed away from that most maximalist position, his poll numbers returned. They're not great. He's still underwater, but they return to kind of like where the typical Trump approval rating is. And now you have the court stepping in on this one, potentially, if he decides to take the out, saving him from the most unpopular part of his agenda. The court stepping in on the, kidnapping of college students who dared to protest or write an op-ed or whatever over Palestine. Court stepping in and saying, that's unconstitutional, you can't do that. You have Elon, I think Doge ended up remarkably, because the project of, hey, let's cut the government and like make it more efficient is a broadly popular project, but because it was executed in such a horrific, disastrous, catastrophic way, and Elon himself is so personally unpopular, the fact that he is now officially out of the administration, going back to his companies, even criticizing Trump, and we'll show you that in the B block on the big beautiful bill and some other things as well, that also is sort of taking a chainsaw, if you will, from his administration, one of the most unpopular pieces. But all that being said, they are still full steam ahead with the big beautiful bill, which is a gigantic giveaway to the top, at the expense of millions of Americans, healthcare, food stamps, et cetera. So now that's the next piece that is going to be profoundly unpopular. And he was never more unpopular in his first term prior to January 6th, which is really after his term. He was never more unpopular than when he passed the original Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that was the giant giveaway to rich people.
Yeah, and when we talked yesterday about the way that the energy portion of this big, beautiful bill that's going through.
Yeah, that was a good segment.
It's crazy. It doesn't just go after clean energy.
Right.
Like his AI buddies are saying we need a doubling and tripling of energy so that we can, make these, fake videos. And so we can
steal your jobs.
So we can steal your jobs. So we need 3 times the energy. He's taking a sledgehammer to not just clean energy, but also the transmissions that you need to, if you can actually expand energy production so you can transmit it to where it needs to go, to the production of natural gas turbines. It's like all of the things that you would need to actually make, even if you wanted to make it dirty,